Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition, and this is Midday with Reverend Don. Welcome. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments into whatever platform you're watching on, and on most of those platforms, your comments will show up here in my chat room, which is on the screen because I do not have a guest today, and we can all share the chat room together. And I hope you're having a lovely day. And it has been uh, an interesting couple of days here because the local feral cats have been having quite the ruckus. And I don't know if you can hear them in the background, but they are apparently fighting for territory. And that has been an interesting backdrop to the last couple of days. Um, but, this is part of life. And our subject today is continuing the idea of barbecuing sacred cows. But first, I am in the process of working on catching up bills, and so I'm offering a special on readings. And if you're interested in having a reading, this is a very good time to get one. I am offering them at a reduced price. You can find it on my Facebook page. It's $60 for a half an hour. I'm sorry. Let me just double check. It's 50 for half an hour and 80 for a full hour for the next few days. I won't be making the offer long, but it's available now. And if you would like to get a reading, this is a good time to do it. And also, you can schedule it for any time in the coming year. It doesn't have to be one that you want to get now, but it's a good time to buy it and would be a big help to me. Also, if you want to be of help to me and support my work, I recommend my Patreon at revdonlewis.com, which is one of the primary things um, that supports me. And I want to say hello to Janet Gann in the chat room. It's good to see you, Janet. And hello to Renee in the chat room. It's good to see you, Renee. So, coming back to our subject, the barbecuing of sacred cows. Oh, and hello to Mary Hawk in the chat room. As Ed the Pagan puts it, the sacred cows make the best Dharma burgers. Um, but the idea is that people often take assumptions they have made and turn them into sacred objects that they cannot deviate from. Political assumptions, personal assumptions, social assumptions, and sometimes these are not accurate assumptions. Other times they are accurate, but are outgrown, or are accurate, but they change. But the person, having made them into a sacred cow, cannot deviate from them. Let me see if I can think of a good example. Let us say, let us say that there's a particular organization that you belong to that you've had lots of good times in. So you think of it as being a good thing that you always want to remain involved in. At a certain point, you stop having a good time for one reason or another. Maybe you've outgrown the subject matter. Maybe you've outgrown the company. Maybe your life has just gone in a different direction. It's important then to reassess how much time you want to put into that group. Um, if it's no longer meeting your needs, you may want to change that. It seems like a simple thing, but for some people, it's very, very difficult. In fact, for most people. Um, Perhaps a less relevant exchange. One of the things I've noticed in the last 10 years or so, maybe a little bit more, in watching the political discourse in the United States. So a lot of people are arguing about things that were true 20 to 30 years ago, but are not true now. The world has moved on from those things, but these people are still concerned about them. In some cases, because they live in geographically more isolated areas and maybe don't realize things have changed, but in most cases, because they haven't chosen to look. They're terribly upset about these things that aren't even really on the table. Um, an example is the idea of factories coming back to small towns. I watched Hoopston jumping through all kinds of mental acrobatics over the idea that the factory culture of the 1950s and 60s would come back, um, which is not at this time possible. It's not possible for several reasons. One, at that time, that community was at the juncture of several important roadways, which are no longer important. Therefore, people and goods were coming through it on a regular basis, which no longer are. Um, there was an infrastructure in place to support that kind of factory, which is gone now, including the buildings where they could possibly locate, and also including the technology, which was cutting edge in the 1950s and 60s, but wouldn't get you very far today. In order to build a factory today, you have to use, for the most part, more modern technology. There are some things that probably haven't changed much, but most things have. And therefore, you're either going to have to build from scratch or you're going to have to seriously update. And you need certain things to do that, including a population who has the knowledge that you will need for current manufacturing, uh, a supply chain that will give you the substances you will need to do that, and builders nearby who have the technical skill to do that. And so many of the small communities who think this can be resurrected have none of those things. And hello to Wendy in the chat room. It's good to see you, Wendy. It's not to say they couldn't rebuild them, but you can't rebuild them overnight, particularly the education of your populace. And we have been, how can I put it nicely? We have not been increasing the quality of our public education in the kind of terms that would be necessary for that particular scenario for some time. We've tended to focus on other areas um, which aren't necessarily helpful to that. And yet many people still think of this as being the ne plus ultra of everything they're concerned about, neglecting the fact that the things that are needed to do it are not there. In the 1950s and 60s, we were producing a lot of the raw materials that were necessary for building that sort of thing. That would have to be reconstructed. It could be reconstructed, but not overnight. That's one of the things I think that so many people are missing. It's not sometimes with these sacred cows that they can't be done, but they can't necessarily be done the way they were done or the way you think they can be done. And how do you know? Well, if what you're doing isn't working, well, you have to try something else. And it's that ability to say, yes, we must try something else, that constitutes the barbecuing of the sacred cow. It is vitally important when you see that what you're doing is not effective, that you change it. Now, part of this also is the question of, well, what is the point of what you're doing? Going back to what we were just talking about, if the point of what you're doing is to try to resurrect manufacturing, then the way we've gone about things is not, in my opinion, very effective, or we would have seen a different result. I don't think the way we're going about it right now is very effective either, but we shall see. Part of barbecuing sacred cows is that you also have to bear in mind that what you think might not work could. Um, but we shall see. However, if your point in being concerned about that is actually simply to generate constant outrage, well, then it's been very effective to constitute to create constant dissatisfaction. Well, that's been very effective in that. But as far as changing the situation, the things that we have done have not been effective. And so the question then becomes, well, which of these are you really trying to do? Are you trying to just be emotionally excited all the time? Or are you trying to make a difference? And unfortunately, I think for a lot of people, the answer is that they're addicted to the emotions. They want to be constantly upset. They want to be constantly emotionally exercised. And I look back to the Jerry Springer's show. There were a lot of people who said, this is not a good thing. This appeals to people's worst instincts. And, at the time, I didn't really see anything wrong with it. I thought, oh, yeah, it's rather unseemly, but what of it? Looking at it now, it was not the cause, but the sign of an unfortunate change that was happening. And that was people being constantly amped up on exaggerated emotions. And I think that's a lot of what has brought us to where we are. And I don't think that's a good thing at all. And I am not a friend of what is sometimes called artificial outrage or outrage in general. I am a friend of rational consideration and reasonable alternatives, which don't get a lot of attention these days because very few people are looking for rationality. They're looking for something that gives them that moment of emotional stimulation. Rationality doesn't do that. Rationality calms you down. But if you want to be successful, if you want to be happy, you need to be looking at that calmer, less exciting alternative. Renee says, your shirt, tie, and tie clip look exceptionally nice today. Thank you, Renee. This is a lovely Art Deco piece that formerly belonged to my father. He left it to me. I don't know if you can exactly see it, but it's a lovely Art Deco design. And we want to say hello to Jennifer Berry in the chat room. And Jennifer says, I'm Jennifer. I'm a good pagan solitary practitioner witch. I do mountains magic. Good spring magic is in the air. Blessed be. Blessed be to you, Jennifer. It's good to see you. I'm not always sure how I feel about the red shirts, but the last couple of years I've gotten compliments on them, and so I tend to keep one. And this particular tie tack, because it has the red enamel in it, is very good for putting with red. I love my jewelry. My whole family has always loved its jewelry. And over the last couple of years, I parted with a good bit of it, and I'm still parting with things. And if you watch my page, there are a number of things I'm going to be putting up for sale in the near future. As I say, I'm working to catch up on bills from the long winter. But the way I look at it is that I'm doing my death cleaning early. What does that mean? The idea of death cleaning is the idea that you want to consider what you're leaving to the people who come after you. You don't want to overwhelm them. And in my mind, a number of these pieces are going now while I'm still living to friends and family who want them, so that it doesn't have to be worried about when that day eventually comes that I'm no longer living, and my son and other heirs won't have to deal with it. When my father passed, he left a mountain of things um, that I was only partly able to deal with. And I have to say that thinking of it in those terms, I'm quite happy to not be doing the same thing. I've still got lots um, to deal with in the remaining years of my life, but I'm hopeful that when the time comes for me to cross over, I will be leaving um, an estate in good order without a lot of stuff to be dealt with at that time. A few things. Uh, I mean, my personal my wardrobe jewelry will still be here. A few family pieces will still be here, the good ones. Um, some of the better parts of my library are still around, um, but it's not going to be a hopefully a load that falls on anyone's shoulders. And that's part of that rational approach that I'm speaking of, because it's human nature to want to collect and hold on to um, and never let go of. But you have to stop and think about circumstances, and who's going to be there at the end of your life? Who is going to have that? Just over the weekend, we sold a number of my tarot decks, the Shultun Tarot, the Tarot of the Ages, one of the Thoth Tarot, um, a Marseille Tarot, all of which I used to use in reading, and most of which I was quite fond of, but I haven't read with any of them for years. Why am I holding on to them? They have now gone to homes that will hopefully love them and put them back into normal use. Um, or if not, at least proudly show them off. And I perceive that as a good thing. Lady Crystal, who was my teacher, rarely held on to material objects for any length of time. I took after my mother, I held on to everything. But at this point in life, I'm starting to feel a little bit more like Lady Crystal. I want to have the things that make me feel good. I want to have the things that give me a good life. I don't feel the need to hold on to everything. And I think that is a sign of growth, a sign of adaptation to changes in circumstances as I've gotten older. And that's what I'm talking about today when I talk about barbecuing sacred cows. I used to be a collector of everything. I collected tarot cards, I collected books, I collected jewelry. And I now have only the better parts of those collections left that I actually have use for um, on a regular basis. And I think that serves purposes better. I've talked in the last couple of shows, and we're coming down to the point that um, and Jennifer says in the chat room um, how she has lost her mom and daddy, and they have left her a collection of jewelry that she's not fond of, but wants to appraise and sell and use that money to look for a meaningful tartan and get have that made into a great kilt. And that's exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about. Do the practical thing. Do the thing that will make your life better. Um, and put things to practical use. Now, in the last few days, I've talked about some of the sacred cows in the pagan community that I think are hobbling it, like being afraid of organization. Now, organization, like every other thing in life, exists in a continuum. You can be unorganized, which is, depending on what it is, usually not good, or you can be overorganized, which is usually not good. In between are a variety of different levels of organization. I'm a great believer in Aristotelian virtue, which is the idea that it's always that median point where you're going to find good. If you have too much of it or too little of it, whatever it may be, you're probably not going to be happy with it. So when I say that the pagan community's fear of organization is not good, I'm not necessarily trying to say they should be overly organized, but a certain amount of organization is necessary to get anything done. I see people now trying desperately to politically organize who have always been unorganized and don't really know how to do that. Some of them have spent their lives fighting against the idea of organization. But now suddenly they realize they needed some. They'd be in a better place if they had done that a little bit earlier. The fear of money that we see in the pagan community. I've known pagans who think that the presence of a dollar corrupts everything on earth. But then, when they want to do something and they have no means to do it, they wonder why. Money is a marker for energy, and we need it. You can have too little money, which is most of us, or you can have too much, I think. And I've observed in my life that the people who have the most problems are often the people who have too much money rather than the people who have too little. Because I've known a number of people, usually children of wealthy families, who were hardly able to solve any problem that they faced because they'd never faced it previously, where an ordinary person would have dealt with it years before and learned how to handle it. To a certain extent, in my youth, I was even in that position myself. But in my 30s, I learned how to deal with everyday issues that I'd largely been insulated from in my 20s. But money itself, particularly for an organization, can be very, very important if you want to do anything. And again, I'm watching people trying to organize right now, well after the point they should have done so. But still clinging to the idea that there must be no structure and no money involved, and I don't know what they think they're going to get. It's not going to get them very far. These are examples of sacred cows that really should be barbecued. And I talk constantly about shadow work. And I've given some of the classic examples of shadow work. The person who wants to get a particular kind of job, but in their heart, they don't feel that they can have that. That's an example of a sacred cow that should be barbecued. That idea that they can't have that job that they would like. But you'll find this frequently. They think they want it, and if you ask them, they might say that they think they could have it, but if you talk with them further, you'll find they don't believe it's possible. You see this also with romance very often. A person is looking for a certain kind of romance. They have certain things they want to see, but if you look deeper, you'll find they don't believe that can exist. They don't believe it's possible. It's a sacred cow that should be barbecued through shadow work, which is how we deal with all of this, which then allows us to pursue that thing we formerly thought was not possible. Or it allows us to take a different path from what we formerly thought we must do. There's an old saying, I made my bed, now I must lie in it. And the answer is no, you do not have to lie in it. You made the bed wrong, well, remake it. Get a new bed. Sleep on the floor, sleep on the couch. If you're not comfortable in the bed, don't sleep in it. And hello to Nikki in the chat room. It's good to see you, Nikki. These are things that Jennifer says money is an object. Well, yes. And we need some to survive, but the people who are rich are the people who have love, kindness, compassion. And yes, I would certainly agree with that. Um, However, if you have love, kindness, and compassion and no money, you're going to be in a hard place. Um, and I'm certainly not saying, and this is part of the problem that I think people often encounter, because especially in U.S. culture, people are often trained, because of the conservative Christian bias in the larger part of the community, to see things only in black or white. They can only see the extreme. So on one hand, you have no money. On the other hand, you have an excessive money. Whereas again, the real virtue lies in the middle, in having enough for what you need and maybe a little bit more. Um, Maybe even quite a bit more, depending on circumstances, but not saying that you should make it the idol of your temple. So often people insist on going to those extremes. This is why Aristotelian virtue is so important, and why, when we talk about the nine Corellian virtues, we lead into that by first talking about Aristotelian virtue and the fact that you can have too much or too little of any given thing. Some of those virtues include courage. And, if you have too little courage, you're cowardly. But if you have, or timid, or however you want to put it, but if you have too much, you're foolhardy. Compassion. You might say, how can you have too much compassion? Well, we know what happens if you have too little. You become hard-hearted. But if you have too much compassion, sometimes you become an enabler who helps people to harm themselves by being so compassionate that you do not stop them from self-destructive behavior. Um, Everything can be underdone or overdone. And um, this is true for whatever vice or virtue you think of, because they're all in a continuum that leads from vice if it's too little, to virtue at the right point, to vice again if it's too much. And it's not two opposite ends the way Judeo-Christianity tends to teach. It is a continuum. Changing that mindset is, I think, very important. We'll see what happens with that, but I think it's very important. And with that, I see we've come to the end of our half hour, and it's time to have a word from our sponsors. And here we go. Hello, this is Rev Don Lewis, coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and I would like to invite you to my Don Art showing and auction on Friday, May 9th, with original pieces and prints of my artwork and other interesting items, with the auction at 5 p.m. on Whatnot. And please stay tuned for more announcements and examples of art that will be coming. Thank you. And thank you to our sponsors, Equinox Learning Hub and the Don Art auction on May 9th. I hope you'll join us for that. I thank you for joining me today, and I'll be back tomorrow. And now let us close with our prayer, as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we ask you to help us to keep our minds and hearts flexible so that we constantly reassess the things we believe and value, to keep them always useful in building the better world we hope to see for ourselves and others. Help us to turn away from things we have outgrown and embrace the things we need now in the moment as we go forward, and for the future. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love. Knowing you're always with us, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. I thank you for your presence. May you be blessed now and always, and I will see you again tomorrow.